Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of Bach's chorale harmonizations. Apologies for the lack of uploads these last couple of days. It's been a tremendously busy week for me. It was a concert week for work, and I actually had a performance last night, so I spent a lot of time rehearsing, and I did not quite have the energy to put videos together for the channel, but we are done with the concert week, so we're back to a regular upload schedule. However, we're nearing the end of the journey, so routine uploads are only going to be for the next couple of days. But with that being said, today we're looking at Wo Gott zum Haus, nicht, gibt, sein, Gunst, which translates to where God does not give his favor to the house. Fairly straightforward chorale, only one real chord that's kind of contentious in terms of the harmonic makeup, but we're going to hop right into the analysis with that being said. So we have one sharp in the key signature. We start on G, we end on G. I reckon we're in the key of G major. Then we go to F sharp, A, D, and D, which is 5-6, D major over F sharp, neighbor tone in the bass. Then we get F sharp, D, A, and D, which is another 5-6 chord we don't need to reanalyze. This D in the bass here is also a chord tone, so we don't have to mark it. We then get G, D, G, and B, which is our tonic triad, G major. And then we get F sharp, D, A, and A, which is another 5-6 chord. So not a lot of harmonic variety in these first couple, or I guess several beats. The pickup and the first complete measure. But with the C sharp here in the melody, I think we're nearing a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D major, which is really in the grand scheme of things kind of functioning like a cadence on the dominant. But with the C sharp in the melody, it really does feel like we've moved to the key of D major by this point, rather than this being a half cadence in the key of G major. So we have a bit of a zone here where any of these chords could be points of modulation between the key of G and the key of D, but I'm going to say that we modulate on the downbeat of the second complete measure of the chorale, namely because of the fact that we get C sharp afterwards. But any of these beats would be totally valid in terms of analyzing the modulation. So we get E, G, G, and B. E minor is 6 in the key of G, and it is 2 in the key of D. Passing tone here in the tenor before we get A, E, G, and C sharp, which is A7. It's our 5-7 chord. And then we cadence on D major, D, D, F sharp, and D. 3 roots, 1/3, but our tonic triad nonetheless. We then get a perfect authentic cadence in the key of G major at the end of the next phrase. We start off with F sharp, D, A, and D, which is our tonic triad in first inversion here, so we don't need to reiterate the Roman numeral, but we get a passing 7th here in the melody, which is C natural, not C sharp, which indicates that we're probably moving back to the key of G major at this point, and D major is now our 5 chord again. We've seen only 5-6 chords in terms of G major at this point, which I think is kind of interesting. That takes us to our tonic, G, D, G, and B. Passing tone in the melody. Then we get B, D, F sharp, and D. Kind of an interesting progression here, where maybe we would expect the tonic triad in first inversion. We get a 3 chord, which is very similar to a tonic triad in first inversion. The only difference between the two chords is G versus F sharp. So 1 going to 3, not the most common chord progression, but here we see it. That takes us to E, E, G, and C. 3 often goes to 4, often in first inversion as well, because the bass movement is the 3rd scale degree going to the 6th scale degree, which follows that cycle of falling fifths narrative. But after 4-6, we see F sharp, D, A, and D. Yet again, another 5-6 chord with a passing 7th in the melody as well, and then we get G major, G, D, G, and B. After our tonic, we get D, D, F sharp, and A, which is our 5 chord, our first 5 chord in root position in the key of G major. Passing 7th in the tenor. Sorry about the siren in the background. And then we have G, B, D, and G, which is our tonic in root position. Moving on to the next phrase, we have a half cadence in the key of A minor, ending right here with this E major chord. we start the phrase off with G major, G, B, G, and D. No need to reanalyze. And from this point forward, we're looking for a point to mark the modulation between G major and A minor. We get C, C, G, and E, which is our 4 chord in root position. Neighboring 7th here, passing tone in the tenor, which actually leaves us with B, D, G, and E. That's E minor 7 over B as a 6-4-3 chord. I think this is more of a coincidental chord than anything else, just because 4 and 6, they're a third apart, and I think this is more so just a byproduct of the non-chord tones happening here, but it does leave us with a chord, and more recently than not, I have been analyzing these chords regardless of their normative function. But what I think is interesting is the fact that 6 does in fact go to 2, C, E, A, and E, A minor in first inversion. So 6 going to 2 after this subdivided chord progression here is kind of interesting. But I am also going to say that this A minor chord is becoming the tonic in the key of A minor as well, because we see G sharps as part of the next beat. Get a passing tone in the bass, and then we get the contentious chord that I was talking about at the beginning of the video. We have E, E, G natural, and B. So what's that all about? Well, we get the G sharp on the end of the beat, but we also get C natural occurring at the same time. So there are, I think, a couple of ways you could interpret this chord. I'm going to say that the G and the B are accented non-chord tones, making this potentially minor dominant chord it's a possibility as far as analysis is concerned, but I think the G sharp here is really driving the harmonic narrative. You could say this is a minor dominant, then on the end of the beat we get another chord. In this case it would be C augmented over E, which would be 3 plus 6 in the key of A minor. You could say that this is a subdivided chord progression. You could just say that these are accented non-chord tones. For me, I feel like the chromatic motion going on in the alto when paired with the stepwise motion in the melody brings the harmonic focus onto the end of the beat from an analytical perspective. But it's kind of difficult to say. Maybe the aggregate of this is also just a 5 chord where the lower voices E and E along with the G sharp are really driving the harmony. But I think this G natural is more flavorful than anything else. It's not really presenting itself as part of the harmonic progression, analytically speaking. That's just my opinion. The minor dominant is there if you're interpreting literally, but I feel like narratively speaking, it's not playing too much of a role. But it's kind of difficult to say when exactly the modulation is happening here. But afterwards we get F, A, and D. D minor over F, that's a 4-6 chord. Then we get G sharp, E, B, and D. On the end of the beat we get, let's see, that is E7 over G sharp. Sorry, that was confusing me. I was also drawing some attention here. We actually have an augmented second going on here, if I'm not mistaken. Let me go ahead and check the original version and see if that's the case. There is in fact an augmented second going on between F natural and, oh no, this is an F sharp. Apologies, I forgot to take into account the F sharp there. This is in fact D major over F sharp, which would just be a 4-6 chord, which makes a lot more sense, which is why I was kind of confused when going from F to G sharp, because intervallically that is not a whole step, that is a step and a half in augmented second. So this is a much more common chord progression of major 4 to major 5, which typically leads us to our tonic A, E, A, and C in this case. We then have B and G sharp as well. This is kind of an interesting chord. We have B, E, G sharp, and C, which is C sharp 7 sharp 5, or C sharp augmented 7th. It'd be like a dominant 7 sharp 5 chord, which would be the byproduct of taking the 3 in the melodic minor scale or the harmonic minor scale and adding the 7th. So this would technically be a 3-4-2 chord. That doesn't really resolve the way that you would expect. You would expect a 3-4-2 to resolve to 6, like some type of 6 chord in first inversion. And in the key of A minor, that would be an F chord. with an A in the bass, but we don't quite get that. We get A minor, A, E, A, and C. So that would be A minor in first inversion. When we see a 4-2 chord like this, it's difficult to say exactly if 3-4-2 is being implied. Really, this C feels more like a kind of a longer suspension that wants to droop down towards where the half cadence is going. But if we are interpreting it literally, there is a 4-2 chord that doesn't typically resolve the way that we would expect. Bare minimum, we expect the bass to resolve down by step, but here we see it resolving up. But I think the big picture here is that in the lower voices there is an E major chord going on here with the B, the E, and the G sharp, and the C is just there for just because it's part of the melody. But regardless, we get A, E, A, and C, which does turn the chord briefly into root position before we get E major, E, E, G sharp, and B, which is our 5 chord in root position. Moving on to our last phrase, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of G major at the end, like we would expect. But we have a juxtaposition of unlike triads here, where we have E major on this beat, and on the pickup to the next phrase we have E minor, because the the G here in the melody is natural, not sharp. So I do think this is a direct modulation, where we get E, E, B, and G. It's now our 6th chord in the key of G major, and then we get 2, which is where we would expect 6 to go. A, E, C, and F. Apologies, we do not go to 2. We go to, this is also an F sharp as well, not F natural. That is 7, 6. So 2 and 7 often get, they substitute one another often because of the similarity of their pitch content. But yeah, the lower voices prepared me for 2, and we got 7, 6, more specifically 7, 6, 5, because this is not a, this is an E, A, E, C, and F sharp, which makes more sense. It's almost like we have like almost looks like we have suspensions going on in the tenor under the, or maybe even under the melody here with E going down to D, like a 9-10 suspension. But on the end of the beat we do have 3 voices moving, which leaves us with B, D, D, and F sharp, which is 3 in root position. So 7 going to 3 is a very normative chord progression, which is cool. Kind of similar to what's going on here, but like the inverse where 6 goes to 2 on the next beat. But instead we have the normative progression happening as a byproduct of subdividing the beat. We then get C, E, G, and E, which is our 4 chord in root position, C major. Then we have some passing tones here. Typically when we have a 4 chord in a subdivided context, we usually get a dominant on the end of the beat, and in major, a lot of those times it is a 7 chord. In minor, it can be a 7 chord too, but it's also sometimes 5, like we saw earlier. Here we see C, A, and, C, F, A, F sharp, A, and E. Apologies, I have some brain fog today. It's been a couple of days since I've analyzed, admittedly, so I'm getting back into the swing of things, but 4 going to 7 is a very common subdivided chord progression, especially in major keys. We then have G, G, B, and D. That's our tonic G major, passing 7th in the bass, passing tone in the alto, and then we get E, C, G, and E, which is our 4 chord in first inversion, C major, passing 7th in the tenor, and a passing tone in the melody as well, which leaves us with E, B, G, and D. Another E7 chord in this subdivided context, kind of going on like we saw at the beginning of the system. In this case it's in root position. We then get F sharp, A, and C, which is F sharp diminished in root position. Seeing another 6 to 7 chord progression here as opposed to 6 going to 2. Then we have G here along with B, G, and B. The C is a chord tone, B is a non-chord tone, G is a non-chord tone, B is a non-chord tone, and here I'm actually going to mark this as a 1 chord, even though it's an incomplete triad, because I think normatively speaking we do see 7 resolving to some semblance of a tonic chord here. Typically with subdivided chord progressions I only mark chords that are fully voiced, that is to say that they don't have any missing contextual tones. including the fifth, even though it's probably the least important tone in terms of establishing context in major and minor triads. But regardless, I think the one chord is important here, despite the fact that we don't have D in the picture until the next beat. We then get D, D, G, and A. It's a 4-3 suspension over the bass here. Very common to see 4-3 suspensions over the bass with root position dominant triads especially. And then we get D, C, F sharp, and A, which is our 5-7 chord. C occurs at the same time as our resolution to our suspension from the beat of the harmonic rhythm, so that I would mark this as a 5-7 chord as opposed to just a 5 chord. And then we end with G major, G, B, D, and G. Tonic triad, root position. And that is today's analysis. As far as takeaways are concerned, I would say the two big ones are the irregular 4-2 resolution here. It's not, actually, as far as big takeaways are concerned, it's not the biggest, but it is interesting that we get a 4-2 chord voiced here, and it resolves upwards. Makes me question whether or not this chord is even really playing like its own independent role rather than a contrapuntal one where the chord is really just coincidental and a byproduct of the counterpoint. But it does exist if you analyze it, so I do leave it in the analysis in this case, and it's interesting that the bass resolves upwards. And we also get the potential minor dominant going on here. It's kind of interesting where the modulation happens the way that I've analyzed it. It's really a bit of a zone here where you can pick multiple instances where the modulation could occur, but minor dominant is here if you analyze it on the harmonic rhythm, but if you look at the big picture, I think there's more of an augmented triad going on there. But I think I'm going to cap the video off on those thoughts. Thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. I know that the journey is coming to an end. I have a live stream planned for the last chorale to see if I can get any of the regular viewers here to ask questions or to analyze together in celebration of the end of the journey. But I want to thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. But with all that being said, I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.